Hey folks, welcome back to another DC21 live stream. We have all sorts already covered. We've done what's new in Swift UI, what's new in Swift, we've done what's new in Xcode, and today we're talking about a particular new feature of Xcode 13, a real power feature of Xcode 13, which is DocC, which is the all new tool from Apple for building beautiful, interactive, and really native looking documentation that Apple developers will feel at home with because it looks like their own stuff. Even better, it integrates brilliantly into Xcode. They've done a really, really good job. Now, over the next however long, I'll try and walk you through the fundamentals of using DocC in your own projects, how you would actually go about building documentation for your framework or whatever you're working on, and then adding more detailed documentation along the way. Along the way, you will see how very well DocC works in many places. It does some things absolutely brilliantly, and some places where it works less well, and that's okay. You know, it's only beta 1, right? It's early days, quite frankly, for the release. Before I start, some fairly obvious basics to sort of get through super fast. You've got to have Xcode 13 installed, like I have here. Otherwise, you won't have access to DocC. It only supports Swift at this time. Various tweets have flown by saying, you know, they're very aware Objective-C matters and they want to do better Objective-C and have other languages in there as well. So they know, they are hearing you. They're aware they want to add more languages, and we'll see. It looks like Quiet Mischievous, I believe that was Victoria. I'm sorry, my memory is terrible. Is in the chat. Hello, Victoria. So they presented the dub talk on this, by the way. So if I screw it up, this is not DocC. It's entirely me. So they know what languages they know what want to do more, and that's awesome to see. If you were curious, it is pronounced DocC. I was having a conversation with Erica Sadun earlier today, who was concerned it sounds like DocC, which means something else entirely. I wasn't aware. She reminded me, and there you go. This is just one of the features in Xcode 13, by the way. It is a really, really packed release. So I've already did a long video on that, a big article about Xcode 13. Go and check that out separately. It's a great release. I hope engineers are feeling really proud of what they've done. Hey, it's Jack. Jack, also a great talk. This is like dub royalty in the chat area here, you see. Anyway, so just a quick reminder again, this is Xcode 13.0 beta 1, right? If this catches fire, don't be surprised. Beta 1. I mean, if I write beta 1 code, I'm kind of happy if the whole computer doesn't catch fire. So we'll just get on with it, right? We know it's expected here. I'm expecting lots of polish for the final release. So I'm going to talk to you what DocC is, but first I want to talk to you about what it is not. And this really confused me at first, because the first thing I did when I got Xcode 13, I thought, okay, DocC looks like fun. Let's have a dig around, see what it can do. I immediately thought to myself, okay, I'm going to open up a project I know, I'm comfortable with, and I'm way around it carefully. What's it going to do for that? And so I picked Unwrap. It's my iOS Swift learning app. It's a good sized project, not massive, tens of thousands of lines as opposed to millions of lines of Swift code. And I wanted to make sure this is how it does look. This is a good example of the kind of thing we work on as day-to-day app developers here. What's it going to actually do with this? And to find out, go ahead and open your project or your workspace in my case. Got a product and just choose build documentation. And it'll have a think. And it's very fast, to be fair. I mean, it's doing a lot of work. It has a little think. It'll build it out and hopefully present us with the finished documentation thing. And that, from our perspective to begin with, that's all it takes, right? There's not a lot of work to get started with this thing. From an Xcode perspective, obviously behind the scenes, it's scanning all the code, picking out my comments and looking for interesting stuff to pull out and document and get it in here. And eventually, in a few seconds or so, it will finish building 135. Boom. It's built documentation. Brilliant. And there we go. There is the documentation for Unwrap right there alongside Apple's app frameworks, which is really cool. So it's, you're a first-class citizen, as it were, right? You're up there with the greats, with AppKit and similar. Except it's not, because they're pretty clear on this. At this point, it's not designed for main app projects, right? It's designed for frameworks or packages. And my project right now is not built that way. And so as a result, it's done a great job of picking out how quick layout works. Brilliant. This looks fantastic. And how entry kit works and MK ring progress view. The things I'm using inside there work brilliantly. Fantastic. But it hasn't obviously picked out any of my main application code. And obviously it's a bit of a shame, to be honest, because the overwhelming majority of us do work on actual projects. And so when someone joins a team, it'd be nice to say, hey, welcome to the team. I know it's a very big project, but here you go. Here's our on-ramping documentation, walking you through how it all works and getting you started quickly. So we can't do that, sadly. What you could do, and I believe this will work, is, can I pull my project apart? Can I make this part here into a package, this one here into a package, and, split it into smaller and smaller parts? And then I believe it will do a good job of correctly scanning those. So that was my first attempt. Kind of didn't work, kind of worked, yeah, in between. Second attempt was more complex. I thought, okay, fine. I happen to have a package to hand, which is sitrep. And this is a Swift package and a Swift executable. And this thing is significantly bigger. The actual code from my perspective is quite small, but it does depend on, if you look in the package Swift, it depends on Swift syntax. And I've had to push to the 2021 exact branch because it's all 5.5 these days, which is not quite ready for. But this thing depends on Swift syntax, which is a very, 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 very large project from Apple for handling how Swift code works. So you can scan through code and pull out what they call trivia and functions and protocols and yada, yada, yada. And what sitrep does is it uses that to scan through a whole project directory of stuff and say, well, you've got 11 billion view controllers, you've got 8 Swift UI views, your longest view controller is so-and-so, your shortest one is whatever, longest protocol. It's basically giving you stats on your actual project. That's what it's trying to do. And that's where Swift syntax comes in. That's where it's doing all the scanning and the evaluating and da-da-da. It's basically doing all the hard work. That plus Swift argument parser basically makes a nice front end for Swift syntax. So that's what it's doing. So this is a real actual project. It's a real actual package. You can see the code on here. There's not a lot of it on my side. It's all Swift syntax. So this was my second attempt. Can I get this thing to successfully build out stuff? And the answer here, again, sadly, was no. As you can see, it's still building. That's not DocC's fault, by the way. Swift syntax is a lot of code. It's doing a lot of work behind the scenes. I think in release mode, it takes me like 2.5 minutes to build. We'll see how that one works out. Anyway, so it's going to carry on building, but the answer was no. This didn't work either. And again, because of my fundamental misunderstandings of what it's trying to do. So it's not a bug here. This is just my concept of how this thing ought to work in my head, in my imaginary version of DocC, backed up by how the actual real shipping version works. And in this case, it's only going to scan the things that are actually exposed to the public world, that are designed to be sent out there. And most of this project isn't. It's designed for internal stuff. The actual number of external types in this project are only a handful. A couple of methods and a couple of properties perhaps are initialized or two, right? And so it's very tightly focused on people who are going to be using these frameworks, as opposed to people who are building the frameworks or building the projects. So it's not quite what I expected at first, and that's my fault, right? What I would say is that if you've used Jazzy before, Jazzy does many similar things, not obviously the same by a long way, but many similar things. And it also has the same public limitation on what it scans, but it does let you lower the access level down. You could say, actually, let's go for file private or private, whatever you want to. So you can change your mind with that. So yeah, that's a problem. It's a problem in my head. This is not DocC's problem. This is just it wasn't doing what I expected. And this thing is still building. It's normally not this slow, but I think because I'm streaming at the same time, it's obviously being a bit upset. Anyway, so my third attempt was I kind of realized, okay, this is what it is not. It's not going to build documentation for my project. It's not going to build documentation for me working on a framework. It is aimed at people consuming a framework. Then I went to my third choice, which is another framework I have called SwiftGD. And this thing is not a complicated package. It's designed to wrap around, as you can see. Oh, there we are, it's finished. There we are, finally finished. So here I hit sitrep core, and it's got 2 initializers and some parse stuff, and not a lot else basically, because the rest of it is entirely internal. By design. I don't want folks poking around without reason. Anyway, didn't work out. Third attempt, SwiftGD. This thing is an actual package designed to go out to the world, to have folks call in the API and do things with the API and make things with the API. That's the point of this thing. And so this does have lots and lots of exposed properties, which is really nice. Yes, there are some internal things, but honestly, it's only a smattering compared to what is exposed externally. And doing nothing else, you can go to product and build documentation and get a good output. Like, this actually looks pretty good out of the box, basically for free, which is fantastic. So here we go. That is sitrep still. Let's close that. SwiftGD is here. You can see I can choose topics, my class, images, struct, enum, I can choose color, get a hyperlink, and I get the things inside there with what they do, and I'll initialize this one here, and it's all there. And this looks just like I'm reading AppKit or SwiftUI or whatever, and that's powerful in itself, right? There's a lot of saved time in skipping out. How do you find docs? What do they look like? How do I search it? It's all a standardized, simple UI. That's what we're seeing here. As you saw, everything's listed out of the box. All the public stuff exposed to the world is listed right here, and you can just click your way through to find the bits you care about, which is great. So you can navigate around, find stuff the way you expect. And it's indistinguishable, quite frankly, from Apple's own stuff, even down to the dreaded no overview available message, right? This is what we expect to see in documentation in this particular UI. And this works out of the box because it's following the same approach that Jazzy and every modern parser is doing. It's looking at my code in here and saying, where are your documentation comments? What are you trying to do here? So you can see there's comments galore, what we're trying to do, and this goes and rips these out, scans through, and attaches them to the right place, presumably also using something like Swift syntax. And if you haven't used them before, they're really simple little beasts to work with. You want to start with 3 slashes or a /*, and it'll start a documentation comment. And it's separate from your regular inline comments explaining what you're trying to do with the code. The regular 2/ comment is saying, if you're coming to edit this in 6 months' time, here be dragons, or here's what I've tried before, or don't do this, or whatever you're trying to do. What you're trying to solve is in there in your regular code comments, whereas the markdown comments go a level above and explaining externally what should be exposed. And you'll see I use them both. So here's a double slash here. This needs to be a class because we've got to handle an internal GD pointer, yada, yada, yada. So you want to have a good use of both these things. Now, Xcode has treated these comments specially like for a while, right? This is not new in terms of it reading documentation comments. If I had the sidebar open and the quick help pane visible, I could click on init and you'll see a whole bunch of stuff here on the right. It parses it already. It's got summary, discussion, and It knows what it's doing already. That's old here. But to then take it out and make that lovely documentation package, that's the new thing. And that's the beginning of the new thing. There's more things, as you'll see, and work your way through. Now, if you haven't used markdown comments before, the easiest way to start is just to pick out a method like this one here, like resize to, and then press, go like resize to, select it here, for example, and just press the magic keyboard shortcut, Command-Shift-A, and it'll bring up the Code Actions menu, and then you want to choose Add Documentation. And it'll fill in the markdown comment for you to get you started. And you can see it scanned it. It knows it's got a width parameter, a height parameter, apply smoothing, returns. It's done most of the work for us. Personally, I'm a big fan of keyboard shortcuts. I would much rather say the shortcut is Option Command /. Except I've got Alfred running, so it's not. How do I turn off Alfred? Alfred, go away, Alfred. I remap it a lot, turns out. General, quit Alfred. Right, let's try it again. Option Command /. Yeah, there we go. Much easier without Alfred. So you can get that and just fill it in. And that's the simplest way to get started. And it's fantastic here because it does most of the work for you. You want to fill in not what width is, because we can see it's int. Swift knows it's int. What it's trying to describe, the width of the image in pixels, for example, or here returning, obviously it returns an optional image, but what actually is that image? The final resized image in this case, for example. But there's stacks of other markdown you can use inside there, and it's I think pretty much the full range of completely normal, boring markdown stuff. You could go ahead and write code in backticks to get a monospaced font inside your stuff here. Xcode 13 and DocC both look for a specialized version of this using backticks twice. So you might have said, what do we have up here? Let's look for transparent, like that, where I'm referring to something else. I'm referring to this transparent thing up here. So I've made a link by using double backtick as opposed to a regular single backtick. You can, if you want to, refer to things elsewhere. You could have said, well, actually, I know that in the point struct there is a 0 property, for example. Well, that's when double backticks again come in. You do point in here, and it'll try and complete for us, and then do /0, and it'll help guide you through what that link should be to somewhere else. So single backticks for regular code, double backticks for special linked items inside your project. But the whole rest of Markdown's here, so you can go ahead and say, I want to have bullet points by doing an asterisk, or I want to have a numeric sequence by doing 1 dot whatever, followed by more 1 dot whatever, and Xcode will just renumber 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way through. You can do headings if you desperately want to. You can, have top level or second level, two hashes, or third level, 3 hashes, and similar. And do links and more. It's just Markdown, right? So I might do link here. Oops, crazy. 1 bracket. There we go. And let's do https://apple.com. It's Markdown. Bold, italics, bulleting, strike through. I'm sure it's all there somewhere, right? It's just Markdown. But there are some specific things that both Xcode and DocC do look for, and you saw it just briefly with this Markdown comment here. It's looking for things like returns. What is the kind of information stored in that return value? What are you actually sending back? Not just optional image. And that gets pulled out specially. It recognizes that particular dash returns thing and finds it. Same for parameter list. It looked for width and height and apply smoothing, and it now knows what those mean because you're describing it exactly here. So there's a little bit of magic scanning of stuff. It doesn't appear here because it's not using it, but you can also use throws to say this might throw like a load error .network failed or a load error .write failed, whatever the type of thing happens to throw. And there are others, but in practice, that's kind of the ones you're going to use nearly all the time. What the parameters are, what it returns, what it throws, and similar. In fact, surprisingly, if you haven't used it before, one of the most important pieces of text you'll need in these things is actually the enter key, hitting return. Because when you have your first line of text here, I'll do resize an image. I can't type image to a fixed size, whatever like that. That first line becomes the summary for this method. This resize to width, height, apply smoothing method becomes that one line. And if you hit return and leave a nice line gap in there, then this text here, that becomes the discussion, the longer detail below the summary. So the sort of the immediate, what does this thing do, followed by, no, I didn't quite get that, give me more information, add more, add more, add more. So that's the lightning fast, super way walkthrough of Markdown. That's old. That's just plain documentation comments to get us good results. But where I think DocC shines is going beyond that, because we've got already, this is Jazzy, right? This is more or less what Jazzy does. We can go beyond that by adding customized articles that I think really bring our documentation to life, really make it interesting and exciting and more useful, and actually provide some pathway. Because right now, our documentation, where's that window gone we had? This is reference stuff, which is important. You want to know, how do I use this method? How do I call this? Whatever. This stuff matters, of course it does, but there's no priority. There's no trying to explain what our framework's actually trying to do. There's no explaining how it fits together like it's some sort of jigsaw puzzle or whatever. There's no particularly important concept kind of picked out and highlighted. And that's where I think the articles concept really comes in very, very strongly, because we can add custom documentation as well as all the Markdown parse stuff that sits outside our main code base that we can add and customize and make look good as much as we want to. And it's surprisingly easy to do. They've done a very, very good job on this one. So to get started, you want to just right-click here. We've got this thing already, actually. Resources folders sort of sitting there for some reason. Cool. Let's do it again. That's why it's there already. Let's do it again from scratch. Right-click in your project, your package, sorry, and choose New File. And then choose a doc catalog and press Next. And what will happen is it'll make this catalog called documentation, then make a file inside it also somewhat unhelpfully called documentation. And this is a sort of a starting article to get us going with our work here. There's also this resources folder where you can add pictures and content for your particular documentation you're writing. And to get started, Apple just says, listen, just go ahead and make the top level thing for your project. This thing is Swift GD, and so we'll do Swift GD up here. Noticing again the double backtick syntax, which is very, very important. And then go ahead and write your markdown. And this is more or less markdown here. And I say more or less because it's a little bit magical in places, as you'll kind of see. You can write, whatever you want here. That's fine. You can write stuff here. That's fine. What I've kind of figured out is you don't want to touch topics. There's some sort of magical string parsing happening here looking for topics. So leave that one alone. If you change that, the output will look weird. Leave it alone. The group down here, this third level heading, again, it's a bit magic, but in a useful way, because this is where you can start to pick out interesting parts of your project you want to kind of prioritize. So you might say, read this first. This is my most important thing, so read this thing right now. And inside here, in this section here, it's double backticks again, so it's links to parts of your project to talk about. Inside here, go ahead and pick out all the pages you want to point them to, or all the types you want to point them to, all the properties and methods you want to point them to. For example, I said already there's a rectangle type somewhere in here. It is, where is this? There we go. This looks like core graphics. It's like a numpty version of core graphics designed for server-side Swift usage. Load image, resize, draw shapes, and draw text and so forth. Quite straightforward. So I could link to rectangle. Say, read this first. Rectangle is clearly a very important part of my project. Go ahead and read that one first. That is as important. Make sure it's in the double backticks, and it will verify this. It won't error, sadly. It'll warn you saying, you've put something that isn't a link in here. You didn't mean to do that, did you? But that you can point them out whenever you want to. In this case, I'm going to say that's very important. Rectangles. Go and read that one first. So I'll go ahead and press Product and then press Build Documentation, and it'll build that into, all being well, my Swift GD documentation. And it is there. As you can see, there's no mention of my custom rectangle link, and there's no mention of whatever you want here. It's quite fun exploring this because you kind of hit these little snags here and there because it's beta 1, folks. Turns out what they want you to do, sort of silently, is check out your package Swift file, because my thing is back compatible to 5.0. It'll work from any 5 release onwards, and it seems to really, really want 5.5 in here. Like, that's what it wants to hear, is 5.5. I suppose only Swift 5.5. And then it seems much happier building my documentation. He says, watching if it's going to actually work in the first place. Yeah, still isn't happy with that one either. Let's try again. No, get rid of that one. Let's try one last time and see if it's going to play ball. Are you going to link to rectangle? Rectangle. Thinking about it. Build documentation. Do it. There we go. Okay. So it wants 5.5. I mean, obviously, I don't want 5.5. I want to have support older versions of Swift. It's not necessarily fair for a framework to jump ahead quite so far. But anyway, so the point is, if you are able to do 5.5, or if it's a bug they'll fix in the future, it works. So I've made this, custom text here, my text here, my read this first section at the top, backed up by my rectangle link here. And notice how I just put a link in here saying, show rectangle, and it understands, we'll replace that with the actual rectangle type with the summary below. So it's done a really nice job of making that look good. And if you look carefully, it was doing completion of stuff, which is very, very helpful, because you can go ahead and point to complex things if you want to. I could have said, yes, of course, I want to do color or rectangle, easy stuff. But I might have said I want to point to rectangle slash one of its values. Let's talk about rectangle point, for example. And this code completion is really, really helpful when you have, full-on method names. If I had image slash apply interpolation enabled current size, new size, it will just do it for you, which is really nice. And like I said, it'll detect that link, parse it out into the full clickable summarized version at display time, which is really nice. And it will, I believe, check your links for you. So if I happen to muff this one up, make interpolation, it should in theory point that out. Let's find out. Yeah, okay, so you get, it's not an error again, it's just a little warning. Yeah, I suspect an error would be nice, but I mean, they obviously tried that, they know what they're doing, so I'm not telling them what to do. They are watching. Love you. Anyway, so you can go ahead and make changes, futz around if you want to, it's fine. Yeah, so Russell, the hang-ups, so they were part of the fun. They were part of the fun for me. He's going, why is it not working? It surely works. It worked brilliantly in the demo. Yeah, oh well. So once you get over the little hang-ups, it's fine. And honestly, again, it's beta 1, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or something might land. There's lots of time for them to add a warning, get to 5.5 or whatever. It's fine. Anyway, before I move on, I want to show you just briefly how well this thing handles images, because it does a good job with images, which is great to see. What you just do is effectively you just drag your pictures into the resources folder here, and it'll do most of the work for you. It'll take care of the hassle, similar to asset catalogs. And I have some prepared already on my desktop here. And you'll see I've named them sort of, if you remember iOS development before asset catalogs, used to have file name, tilde, iPad, @2x kind of thing. Well, that's back. So I have HWS @2x.ping. Apple recommends 2x images across the board, because of course it works everybody that way. But then also HWS ~dark @2x.ping. And that's enough for it to understand the difference between light mode and dark mode. So the same root file name, HWS.ping, backed up by the scale modifier and the appearance modifier. And all you gotta do is drag those in to your resources folder, like that. I would say, because they're here, I might as well. Folks, I would love to see asset catalogs, because it can get quite out of control when you add lots of assets to your project, and it gets complicated, number of permutations of stuff. So yeah, I'm sure they're totally bored. They're looking for work, you know. So anyway, if they could do asset catalogs, it'd be lovely. Anyway, I've just dropped them into the file here, and so you can just go ahead and use them. You could say, again, standard markdown syntax, something like stuff here, and then I'll just do exclamation mark, square brackets, the hacking with Swift logo. Come on, let's go catch up. There we go. It's a big team. Is it a big team? I've got no idea how big the team is. I thought it was just you and Victoria. I've got no idea how big the team is. And the file name. Now, it's a small snippet. It's like that little bit of markdown, but obviously notice two things. First, please add text descriptions for your stuff where they make sense, so it can actually be read out by VoiceOver. You know, charts or diagrams if you're trying to present to your users, explaining how your app works. Describe it here so that VoiceOver can read it out. It does matter. And then the second part is the file name. I haven't said HWS @2x yada yada yada. I've just said HWS.ping, the root of the whole file name, and it will from that adapt correctly for us, which is nice. So hopefully, if I build that, I keep saying hopefully. I'm very hopeful. I'm super hopeful. There we go. There's our logo. And it's showing the white version, which is the correct one. That's the dark mode compatible version. It appears to be a sneaky bit unstable just at this point. I think if I were to go to general, for example, let's see if this works, and go to light mode. Yeah. So A, that's scalding my eyes, and B, it's left the dark mode logo in place. It appears to want you to change to a different page first and then kind of go back to trigger the change of graphics, which isn't ideal, but beta 1, you know. It's going to get better. There's time. There's like, you know, 2 months, 3 months, I want to say. Unknown amount of time before this thing releases. And that's a small thing. That's a, you know, it's no actual effort to change your page. There's not really a problem, so I'm not worried too much. So we've got a simple article here for SwiftGD, our top level stuff with a picture inside now and a little link to one of our methods here. Abita points out correctly, yes. You know, one of the lovely things about asset catalogs is you can throw everything in them. They're really, really nice. I use them for all sorts of things, you know, PDFs, pictures, colors. In it goes, love it. Anyway, yeah, Julian, bright mode, honestly, it scorches my eyes. In fact, actually, if they're here, if anyone from Apple's DevPubs team who worked on the dark mode documentation, thank you so much on behalf of my eyeballs. It is so nice to have dark mode developer documentation. Thank you. Love you. Anyway, articles. Yes, we have one already. We've got the SwiftGD thing already here, and that's our sort of starting point for our whole documentation point. And you can add more, right? You want to go ahead and right-click on documentation, the first one, and choose add a new file here somewhere, and it'll ask you what you want to add. And there are a few options, and from this point, I want to cover either article or extension, and they've obviously been through, they've workshopped this, and they've checked this, and I find this bit a little bit baffling, because from what I can tell, these two files, technically speaking, are identical. Like, they build the same way, they're just markdown files both way. All that changes is one has double ticks at the top to do stuff. Now, behind the scenes, from what I can tell is, the article file is a straight article. Here's a great way to use my image library. Great. That's fine. But the extension type appears to be much more similar to Swift extensions. You know, you could, of course, have a huge Swift type, which is hashable and equatable and codable and all the way down, right? You can do that. But it's quite common to say, actually, here's the sort of core of my type, and then extension, something else, another type. Eowyn says Apple doesn't workshop. Sorry, that's the wrong phrasing. Apple spend a lot of time going over like API review and similar, like extraordinary amount of time to the best they can. I think it's very easy from our perspective to say, you know, why didn't they just do this thing? They probably did 5 different ways and ended on this particular thing. Like, from what I can see, you know, reading the tea leaves on Twitter, this has been under production for a long time. You know, this isn't like an off the cuff sort of 3-month job. We're looking at least a year or two, if not more than 2 years. So they've tried a number of variations at this point. And I feel pretty confident. Anyway, so an extension to Swift, we'd sort of take this huge file and say, actually, here's the core of it. Over here, that's the codable extension. Over here, that's the hashable, equatable, whatever you want to. Have multiple extensions breaking the bits up to make your code easier to read, easier to follow, easier to just maintain. And that seems to be what Apple are trying to get you to understand here. Even though these both add a markdown file to your project that gets built in exactly the same way, because the template is fractionally different. This one has the double backticks at the top. It will link to a type. So I've linked to SwiftGD up here, linked to the whole, you know, package. I might have linked to rectangle or image or point or color, one of my other types. And this means, if you think about it, that if you want to have, you know, great documentation, you can end up having very, very long markdown comments inside your code. You know, really discussing everything right in there, but that's obviously very painful. And so it seems to be the case they're trying to do here is the extension file lets you say, okay, let's take all this non-essential documentation and yoink that out into a linked documentation file for it, pointing back to it. So you haven't got to have it all in one massive markdown comment. Otherwise, they're both markdown files. They're both built into your project. It's just literally one has 4 backticks, one does not. Anyway, but here, after that long, confusing rant, I'm going to add an article file and show you how we can have more than one article. So I'll press next, and I'll just slide in here as article.md. And you can go ahead and just type stuff in. It's your code here. The name matters, though. What you're calling this thing matters over here, because that's going to decide how you link to it. Now, if you want to use natural names, you can do, you know, important space docs. That's fine. You know, spaces are fine. Other a degree of success, punctuation is fine, because Xcode will complete these things for you. It's smart enough to realize what you're trying to do and help you find them as you're working around. So here I have my new article containing obviously very important documentation. If I want to link to that from my original thing, I have my, 4 backtick thing going on down here. I don't want to link to a type anymore. I'm not linking to something inside my project. I want to link to that page inside my documentation. And that's done with angle bracket doc syntax, like this. And you'll see immediately saying, doc : important docs. So it's figured out A is a space, made it a dash. It figured out that's important, it'll link it in here, and boom. It creates a link to that page basically instantly. And it's really, really easy to do. And the autocomplete is basically invaluable because it does warn you. And so as your documentation set grows larger and larger and larger, Xcode's help become significantly more helpful. Although an error would be lovely, folks, if you could do an error. Because it seems like a bad thing. This link is bad. Don't allow it, but I'm sure I've tried that. Let's see how that looks if we build it back. So hopefully on the main page, important docs. Click through, and there we go. So you can create networks of stuff. You can add images to these things. You can link to your types, do bullets, as many of these things as you want to, as many of these headings as you want to. It's very, very flexible in terms of what it makes. How we're working with it, that is. The end result's that. Pretty much every time. You're going to get Apple-style documentation. And again, I think that's fine. I think it's a good thing because standardized, you understand how to navigate, understand how to search. It's all centralized. And eventually you get to the point where you've said, okay, I've successfully removed all the no view availables from my documentation. I believe that's a good thing to try and do. And you're feeling good. This is good documentation now. I want to pass this off to somebody else. And this is where you can now export it or put it on the web or share it around, Dropbox, however you want to. One thing that confused me at first was, and this is, I'm sure, easily fixable from their perspective, I was just noodling around, writing docs, trying things, pushing, breaking, pushing some more, breaking, fixing, just trying everything, just really giving it a good, hard trial. And it was a mess. I mean, the layout was fine, but there was junk everywhere from me just trying things. And I was like, okay, I want to just start again, a clean wipe, make sure there's no problems here. How do I remove these things? And the docs for DocC says, just right-click on this thing, the dot menu here, and choose delete, which, as you can see, is manifestly not there. And it turns out that what they want you to do in these sort of temporary pushed versions of the archives is close your project, because closing the project closes the documentation for that project or something like that. So that's a bit of a strange brain mental speed bump, but if you want to zap your stuff, it is just temporary. Just close your Xcode project, it'll clear it out. I'm going to assume you like what you've got. You've got a nice thing at this point, and that's where our single option, does come in useful. Export. Because now we can take all our work, we've worked so hard to produce so far, and say, give me this thing as a DocC archive file, export that, bang. And the thing it produces on my desktop, where are you? There it is. There, 1.4 megs, turns out, quite a bit. That is all it takes. That one archive is everything required to show your whole documentation, either in Xcode or on the web. They've put it all into one big thing, and that's presumably why it's 1.4 megabytes. And so you could literally zip it up. I mean, it's not actually anything special, it's just a package. You can just right-click at it and say, show content, and just dig into what's actually done behind the scenes. You'll see there's lots of our data in here. The actual documentation for our stuff is in here somewhere, and various JSON files plus quite a bit of JavaScript. Probably why it's so big, maybe. Yeah, well, this is 169 all by itself. Anyway, it's a small file ultimately. It's a package. Zip it up, hand it around. They can just double-click that, bring it into their Xcode, and bang, they've got your documentation on their machine as well. Now, obviously, a lot of the time you don't want to have, Dropboxing of assets being passed around. That's a pretty hideous way to work, and it'll get out of sync immediately. And so, like I said, they've made this DocC archive package work as a website, effectively. And if you're anything like me, as soon as you see like HTML content, you're like, okay, this is a website right here. The first thing you're going to do, if you're like me, apparently a chump, is you'd go to your desktop and look for hello desktop. There we go, and look for the SwiftGD DocC archive folder. And this is the website, right? This is it here. And you would almost certainly say, okay, Python 3-n http.server, which basically means fire up a local web server in this thing so I can read index.html and its JavaScript and its CSS. And you can't do that. It isn't going to work because they need a variety of particular rewrites to make the thing load correctly. And honestly, if Apple hadn't provided these Apache instructions for me, it would take me quite a while to figure them out. Because it's not a lot, but it would never occur to me to enable mod rewrite to handle rewriting my stuff. And I literally have them in here. These are them, and they're on the distributing your DocC archive talk at 21. If you go to the copy code section of the developer app, you can find it there and try and get it out into here. And you've got to have exactly that, basically. Obviously, replacing your package.docc archive with the actual DocC archive. That's what you've got to have. And when that's enabled, you start up your Apache, or if you're using Nginx, whatever you're using, it will rewrite to the correct location. It basically rewrites /documentation /tutorials to be your package.docc archive /index.html followed by their stuff. That's what it's trying to do here. And to try it out, I have ahead of time set up a local web server, which is down here. And it looks like this. There's my local server. I can go ahead and browse into this stuff, and you'll see this, the page looking for can't be found, error. And I was sort of staring at this thing, well, now what? Why doesn't it sort of show the index page by default as opposed to giving it a 404? But it does work. If you went to, in here, documentation /SwiftGD /rectangle, bang, there we go. So it does work, and I've had to pre-configure a local MAMP server with that HJAX in place and my DocC archive file in place, and what you get is pretty much developer.apple.com, and that's what it looks like, right? You get a little thing at the bottom saying, do you want light mode or dark mode or auto for whatever reason, but you get a lot of stuff here out of the box, lots of out of the box, and that counts for a huge amount. So Eugene's asking, is there some sort of privacy so the docs aren't open to everyone? From what I can tell, unless one of the guests here watching want to correct me, DocC could not care less where this file goes. The fact that it serves as a sort of JavaScript-powered, I think it's Vue-powered website is nice, but it doesn't care how it's being served. It doesn't care that it's MAMP or Nginx or whatever. There's no security, no attempt at security. It's not designed to do that. That's for us to figure out somehow else. It's not DocC's problem. There's actually already, and this is very impressive, I think it is Becker. Let's see. This is available already. What available? It's online already. Becker.cloud, a cloud Xcode DocC documentation hoster, custom domain, preview changes, and lock access to your team members. Well done. I mean, obviously it's a generic, off the sort of shelf bootstrap site, whatever, right? But still, agile. I love it. People are clearly very keen to get their hands on it. So yeah, I mean, they would take care of that kind of thing for you, or you would. You'd have to have, your own login or whatever you want in your site. That's an us problem to solve, not a DocC problem to solve. Anyway, so as you can see, the result is basically developer.apple.com, and it is effectively a sealed box. Like, you don't get to poke around in this very much. You might have noticed in Apple's recommended settings, it does mention just here theme-settings.json, which suggests that there's some option for us to kind of monkey around a bit in there and noodle around and modify stuff. I don't know what to extent that's going to be. certainly I think most open source projects couldn't care less. They in fact want the standard look and feel, right? That's a good thing as far as most of us are concerned. Probably corporates would like to have their standard header, standard footer, legal stuff, growth hacking, popovers, and whatever they want to have, all that corporate branding jazz. Site navigation, right? But the rest of us poor hacks, we couldn't care less. Just give us the developer apple.com style thing. And like I said, it is currently very heavy on JavaScript. The entire thing is JavaScript powered, and I'm not sure why. Like, I get it, because there's a whole other side of it which I haven't gone near in DocC to generate those SwiftUR style interactive tutorials. That makes sense as JavaScript, so you can scroll around and have things fade in and fade out and da-da-da-da. This is basically flat HTML as far as I'm concerned. This is the simplest possible kind of web pages. And to be fair, develop on apple.com, the whole documentation there also does not work without JavaScript. The whole thing there is powered by JS as well. So I can't imagine that changing, but I'd like to see it because it might eliminate all these rewrite problems, and I don't know, it'd be just easier and faster. And battery life, folks. Battery life. Think about saving all the power from not just rendering lots of JavaScript all the time. Anyway, that's been 50 minutes already. Sorry, I went on longer than I expected to go on, and I've got a call with WWDC community shortly. I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. This is only beta 1 of Xcode 13, and that means there's a great deal more time here for things to evolve, things to be refined before we hit a final release. And even then, the final release is just the beginning, right? They're going to have more and more features for a while yet, I imagine. I did poke around a little bit. If you query Xcode build, Xcode build, this thing, was it help? Rats. I forget. Anyway, eventually you can make it point out. There we go. Nope. Whoa, not that one. Anyway, eventually you can find the settings for this thing, and it does mention. That's all Xcode builds help. Anyway, it does mention there are experimental coverage documentation reports and stuff. I don't know how they work yet, but that'd be nice. As room for improvement before release or version 2, version 3, whatever, as things go, being able to say, hey, you're at 55% documented or 80% documented, whatever, would be very, very nice. Or even have it point out, actually, here, and here, you're missing documentation. That would go a long way, I think, to help make it more useful. And again, we don't know yet how it's going to adapt to other languages, or when it's going to adapt, not least Objective-C. And that's important. I want to see this thing be adopted by everyone or not at all. I don't want another XKCD style standard on our hands, right? I want to have a good, consistent way to do this kind of thing. And until we have support for other languages, that isn't going to happen. So I'm sure that's very high on their priority list, as everything else, Now, there are tools out there already that do similar things. Like I said, Jazzy out there. None are quite so integrated. This goes way beyond what Jazzy could do. In a true sort of only Apple can do this kind of moment, it does integrate perfectly with Xcode. As you've seen, it's extremely efficient to get moving, and it looks great out of the box. And I actually asked JP Simard, who started Jazzy 6 years ago, what do you think? Are you looking forward to it? Are you happy about this? And he was actually very, very positive. He's really happy that Apple are working in this space. He's really happy that it's so well integrated. It does so much for us here. It outputs this beautiful sort of site and more, and particularly actually in the short term, because as you saw, it's outputting all those JSON files. Other things could then hook into that. There's no reason this is the end of the whole process. If those JSON files are fixed and standardized, then we can start reading them and working with them and transforming them ourselves to build on top of DocC, which is great. Now, obviously, Jazzy has the advantage of supporting Objective-C today. It is genuinely a community project. It is able to handle private symbols if you ask it to. So there are advantages using Jazzy today, but DocC, as you've seen, is wonderfully integrated, and that counts for a lot. And also, another advantage is that whole other tutorial thing I haven't mentioned. You can now build beautiful interactive tutorials that sort of match the look and feel of the 2019 SwiftUI tutorials. Scroll around, see codes, see screenshots. It's very interactive, very lively, and presumably that's where the megabyte of JSON, whatever it was, comes from, because it's doing all that as well. Now, Apple has said that the whole of DocC will be open sourced later this year, which is really, really nice. And honestly, I'm expecting uptake to be pretty brisk because it is right there to use. There's no, installing Ruby gems kind of nonsense. It's just much, much easier way to get started, which is fantastic. And that Becker Cloud thing, this thing over here, shows people are excited to build on top of it. And that's going to help, I think, accelerate pickup pretty sharpish. Honestly, I feel that this is one of the most pleasant surprises this year, DocC, because the team have done such a good job of building it into Xcode and integrating it smoothly, and it just feels like it's always been there. And I'm very confident in the handful of hiccups you've seen, Swift package tools versions, or light mode, dark mode, or the getting the path right for the server stuff. I'm pretty confident they'll get ironed out for release, because then there's no big issues here. I think sort of screaming at me saying, don't do this is a bad idea. And maybe, again, I'm sure they're really bored. We might even see a few new features, asset catalogs, errors rather than warnings. Anyway, that's DocC. Thank you so much for joining me and bringing your questions and suggestions. I look forward to seeing how you build it. And if you want to find out more, there's stacks of WWDC talks from Jack, from Victoria, from others. I'm sorry if I got the rest of the names that go into lots of detail, walking through how it works and why it works and how to use it, and tutorial designing and so forth. Check them out on WWDC. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask me now, or if Jack hasn't screamed himself to death, you can have a go answering in the chat area. If I haven't terrified him too much with my attempting at documentation. Otherwise, I can see you on Twitter and in one of the many WWDC digital lounges, because they are a lot of fun so far. So I hope you are checking them out, trying them out, and having fun there. Anyway, thanks for joining me, folks. I'm going to skedaddle now to the WWDC community hub. If you are there already, I'll see you in like 5 minutes. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and enjoy the last day of WW tomorrow until another whole year. Oh. See you around, folks.